The Lost Campaigns of Rome Total War. We were meant to get 3 Imperial Campaigns, the base game campaign map, but each set in a different era, like what Medieval 1 had. First campaign was meant to be 263 BC campaign, which would have played a lot like the base game. Although base game started in 270 BC, this date actually makes more sense, as by 263 BC the First Punic War had just begun, and Rome had a foothold on Sicily, something they did not historically have in the game start date of 270 BC. The second campaign was 300 BC, an earlier campaign where most factions start with 1 or 2 settlements, whereas 263 BC was meant to be more the historical start date. 300 BC was meant to be more like a sandbox experience, with each faction starting with only 1 settlement and building out from there. Third campaign was 100 BC, starting with an established Rome, and was meant to focus on the Civil War period, with uprisings like that of Caesar and Spartacus, which I think would have been very cool. Then there were meant to be 6 Provincial Campaigns. Hannibal. This was meant to be the tutorial campaign, a small Italy-focused map where I presume you play as Hannibal and are guided by your advisor. There is artwork that can be found of this in the files. Caesar's Conquest of Gaul, a dedicated Julii campaign, a timed campaign like the Alexander expansion. Second Punic War, a dedicated Scipii campaign, focusing on the western half of the map, dealing with Hannibal's army in Italy, whilst you try and cut them off in Iberia. Pompey the Great in the east, a Brutii dedicated campaign with a dreadful title. This would focus on the eastern conquests. Fun fact, pirates and brigands were meant to be a faction separate from rebels, therefore perhaps there was a planned rid the seas of piracy mechanic focused on in this campaign. A Boudica campaign, set in Britain fighting back against the Romans, or conquering as them. And lastly, Spartacus, a mini-campaign set in Italy, most likely using the same map as the Hannibal tutorial, but that is all we know on this. Then they planned to have 3 more campaigns, called Linked Conquest, a series of historical battles that the player needs to advance through, like the Alexander expansion. Caesar's invasion of Gaul. There's a lot of evidence for these in the files. The devs made it as far as recording the voice line narrations for this campaign, yet seemed to have stopped there.
The Helvetii, a Germanic tribe from the Alps, are on the move out of their mountainous home and into the lands of our allies, the Gaelic Aedui and Sequanii peoples. The Helvetii have already captured the town of Geneva. Fearing that they are going to be completely overwhelmed, these Gauls have asked for Roman help to drive the invaders back. Both tribes are friends of Rome and thus entitled to Roman aid. It is your task to help the Aedui and the Sequanii defend themselves. Drive the Helvetii back into Germania and capture the town of Geneva. Congratulations. The Helvetii had been sent back to their mountain hovels, and your army has been brought back up to strength. It may be prudent to spend a few turns recruiting extra troops from among the locals now under your rule. This should prevent the Helvetii from trying any more foolish incursions. Aedui and Sequanii peoples are patently unable to look after their own affairs without calling on Roman legions to defend them. It is now time to bring them the full benefits of Roman rule, seeing as they rely on Roman armies to keep the peace. Capture the towns of Bubractiae and Vesontio, and by doing so, annex the region for the greater glory of Rome. Be prepared for the Gauls to resist their inevitable destiny. Although you are closer to conquering all of Gaul and bringing the many benefits of Roman rule, your actions have been like a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples are moving outwards and disturbing existing calm. In the north of Gaul, two of the tribes, the Belgae and the Nervii, believe that unless they fight now, they will be turned into slaves of Rome. This is, of course, nonsense, but they must accept Roman authority or suffer the consequences of their rebellious behaviour. Move to capture Samabriva and Adiatuca and stop the resistance of Belgae and the Nervii before it can infect any other parts of Gaul. Your engineers have already constructed superior siege equipment to assist during any assault on the Adiatuca, the Nervii's defended and fortified settlement. You now control northern Gaul. But in the west, the Venetii tribe have formed an ugly alliance against Rome involving the southern Gauls and the tribes of Britannia to the north. They seem to be planning to bring the nasty little Britons to Gaul to fight alongside the locals. You must now split your forces and send some to crush the western Gaelic tribes, while taking the rest across the seas to attack Britannia. The chance to bring this wild island under Roman control is also one for glory, riches, and renown. With all that has happened in Gaul recently, the Germanic tribes of the Usipetae and Tenterii have misinterpreted the imposition of Roman law as a chance for them to expand their own influence. They have been tempted to fight as mercenaries in the service of the Nervii, but now, perhaps, they will be keen to stay on their own account. Drive these Germans back to their wild forests or kill those who lack the sense to run. A limited number of reinforcement units for use in this action are now available. Some friends are good and true, others prove to be enemies behind their false smiles and barbaric moustaches. Vercingetorix, the leader of the Avernii people, has proven himself to be in the second group. Once a friend of Rome, this traitor has turned on all Romans and rebelled against our authority. Now he leads his misguided people into further trouble. Capture the 3 key strongholds of Avarissum, Gergovia, and Alesia, and the resistance under Vercingetorix in central Gaul will be broken once and for all. The Gauls will finally understand who are the masters and who are the servants in this land. Your engineers have prepared some siege equipment that will prove useful in reducing these fortified towns. It has also been possible to hire some Gaulic mercenaries, and these have been added to your armies. All of Gaul is nearly suppressed and under the rule of noble and upright Romans. One more effort is all that is needed to secure the entire province. Complete the conquest of Gaul by eliminating the independent tribes in the southwest, by taking the settlements at Uxalodonum and Tolosa. Such a victory will surely be worthy of the thanks of a grateful Senate and the approbation of the enthusiastic plebeian mob in Rome. Roma Victor.
Hannibal's invasion of Italy. This series of historical battles would have likely ended with Zama, or perhaps an alternate, epic, hopeless siege of Rome. And last, the rebellion of Spartacus. Each of these would be branching, meaning the results of your battles could affect what happens in the next battle. For example, just making this up, if you lose a special unit in the first battle, that unit will not continue with you throughout. A battle may have a side objective, and if you fail to complete it, another army may face you later. As examples, campaigns were also planned to have multiplayer, up to 16 players total, likely a hot seat system. Evidence that the hot seat system had been pretty much almost completed by launch can also be found in the game files. Expansions. A Fall of Rome campaign was planned as an expansion called Fall of the West, covering 200 AD to 500 AD. I think this was meant to be what became Barbarian Invasion, although its title implies it is a Western-themed campaign. The info I have talks about it involving the Eastern Roman Empire as well. This campaign was meant to have multiple scenarios, different start dates, linked battles, and possibly provincial campaigns, like the base game. I imagine a 270 AD campaign, like Rome 2's Empire Divided, with a campaign themed around Constantine the Great, and lastly the Fall of Rome campaign that we got in Barbarian Invasion. Provincial campaigns could include a Justinian Reconquest campaign, and a Fall of Roman Britain campaign, etc. Perhaps a linked campaign could be themed around Attila the Hun, following a load of historical battles against different opponents, ending with his defeat. Comment down below any ideas you may have, as sadly my knowledge on late Roman history is very limited. We now know OG Rome was meant to have naval battles as a feature. This Barbarian invasion expansion was meant to add capturable ships, river combat for ships on campaign and battle maps, meaning boats can sail down the Nile, for example, and ships being able to provide support in land battles. This expansion would also come with multiplayer updates. This is complicated, so I will just quote what they said. Rome Total War Fall of the West will feature a persistent world online environment where players can take persistent armies and fight for money, experience and terrain. This will work in a manner similar to how players develop individual characters in persistent world online RPG games. RPG stands for role-play games, so they really said World Online Roleplay games. Alternatively, there will be large-scale multiplayer games where a number of players enter the world, and as players are eliminated, the remaining factions get control of their resources. This means that the game would have an overall unit resource cap, which is divided between all the players within the world. Using this system, it could be possible to have as many as 100 players within a single game. It will be possible for players to take the single or multiplayer campaign Rome Total War game online to make it accessible to invasions of online barbarians. This will mean that players who want a quick fix of action will just be able to go online, raise a tribe of warriors and attempt to raid an established empire in the game. This will be fun because it will mean that players who have won the game and established their thriving empire will simultaneously be able to get a new challenge and show off how powerful their empire is. The more that they win, the larger the size and strength of the enemies which they are able to face will become. End quote. Sounds cool. This is not the Hotseat Multiplayer stuff I mentioned earlier. This was meant to be something very different. I imagine something like Shogun 2's multiplayer campaign, but a lot more in-depth, with, as it says, 100 players being possible. Finally, this expansion would come with expansion packs of factions. It does not detail these too much, but I think they mean that new factions would be added to the base game. For example, if you buy Barbarian Invasion, then you unlock the Germanic factions of the Franks, the Lombards, the Alemanni, etc. on base Rome, as a selectable option instead of just the Germans. An Alexander expansion was also planned, yet they say very little on this. This file is dated to 2002, 2 years before the game launches, yet there are plans in here which talk about what they plan to do during the year 2000. I believe this document is an edited version, and some of the stuff I have talked about today dates back to the year 2000, just after the release of Shogun 1. This document talks about Illyria and not the Greek city-states. Here are some other cool little mechanics I have found. If you become a vassal of Rome, you have the chance to Romanize and support Rome instead. Let's say you play as Macedon and lose to Rome. I guess you have the chance to become a province of Rome with some Roman units and can expand as part of the Senate, possibly taking a side or trying to break away when the civil war breaks out. The Brutii were originally meant to represent the generals, such as Pompey, and the Scipii were meant to be the nobility faction. This dagger is not meant to represent the dagger of Brutus, but it is meant to be the sword of generals like Pompey or Gaius Marius. The Julii were meant to be red and black, Brutii red and gold, and the Scipii red and white. Single entity heroes were also planned, but thankfully were not a thing. Lastly, there is evidence of a mechanic where the troops in your army will age over time. So, if you have a Hastati unit, soldiers would start to become less effective, or leave the army due to old age and retirement, ultimately expecting land to settle as their pension. There's so much more cook content found in here, which I would love to cover in more detail in the future. If this video gets to 1000 likes, I'll release a load more information. Hope you enjoyed, hope to see you in the next one, but for now, MELKOR.